Rain slipped down the glass in steady rivulets, blurring the city lights beyond the apartment window. Inside, a low hum from the refrigerator was the only sound, save for the scratch of Milo's pencil across a worn sketchpad. He sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by scattered pages filled with designs, costumes, figures in motion, fractured ideas that hadn't yet found a home. His focus was intense, almost desperate. Drawing helped him forget the gnawing uncertainty that clung to his every decision. Across the room, Elena stood in the kitchen, her arms folded tightly over her chest. She wasn't looking at Milo, though her gaze drifted to him more than once. The tension in her shoulders had become a constant presence over the last few weeks. She had learned to measure Milo's silence, not just as absence, but as avoidance. "You missed your meeting again," she said quietly, her voice carefully neutral. Milo paused, the pencil hovering mid-stroke. He didn't look up. "It wasn't important. It was your third meeting with the gallery," she replied. "That doesn't sound unimportant." He exhaled, as if deflating. "They want something I'm not ready to give." Elena stepped away from the counter. "You mean they want commitment, direction, maybe even proof you actually care about showing your work?" "I care," he said sharply, then softened. "Just not the way they want me to." A silence settled between them, deep and familiar. Milo's mind was a labyrinth of ideas, but when it came to talking about them, letting someone in, he always closed a door. Elena had spent years learning how to pick that lock. Lately, it felt like every key she had ever forged was useless. She took a seat on the couch, letting her eyes wander across the artwork littered across the floor. Most people would kill for that opportunity. A chance to be seen. Milo finally looked up, and for a moment, his expression flickered with something Elena couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe, or fear. "Being seen isn't the same as being understood," he said. Before she could respond, the front door rattled open. A gust of wind swept through, and with it came Leo, Milo's younger brother. His jacket was soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes lit with adrenaline. He tossed his bag aside without ceremony. "I swear the buses are getting worse every day," he muttered, then noticed the tension hanging in the room like a fog. "What did I miss?" Elena rose, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Nothing. Just a conversation we've had before." Leo glanced between them, eyebrows raised. "Milo, you okay?" Milo gave a half-smile. "I'm always okay." It was the sort of answer Leo had grown used to, even as he stopped believing it. He kicked off his shoes and moved toward the kitchen, but paused when his eyes caught the stack of unopened letters on the counter. "You got something from Dad." Milo's jaw tensed. He stood, walked over, and picked up the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable, clean, mechanical, as if written without emotion. He turned it over once, then slid it into the drawer without opening it. "You could at least read what he has to say," Leo said, voice low. "He said enough when he left," Milo replied. Elena didn't speak, but her eyes followed Milo as he returned to his sketches. She'd never met their father, only heard the pieces, an artist himself, brilliant but absent, emotionally remote until finally, he disappeared altogether. Milo never talked about him in anything but fragments. The wind howled against the window, and the city lights flickered faintly beyond the storm. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the three of them sharing a space that wasn't built to hold their separate silences. Leo leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You ever wonder if he left because he was like you?" Milo looked up, startled. "I mean," Leo hesitated. "He had all that talent, right? Maybe it just got too heavy." "It didn't get heavy," Milo said, quieter now. "He just walked away before he had to carry it." For a while, no one said anything. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing harder against the windows. Elena returned to the couch, and Leo slumped into a chair near the door. They had all grown used to waiting for Milo to open up, used to the way he created distance even in the same room. But something in his face tonight was different. Tired, yes, but also exposed. Milo closed his sketchpad. "I've been thinking of leaving." Elena sat up straight. "What?" "Just for a while. To figure things out." "Leaving where?" Leo asked. I don't know yet, Milo replied. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that doesn't expect anything from me. Elena searched his face. You really think you'll find clarity running from everything? I think I'll suffocate if I stay. That answer left little room for argument. Leo opened his mouth, then closed it again. Elena stared at the coffee table, where a half-finished drawing lay in soft graphite, a hand reaching out, fingers curled but not closed. A gesture caught between offering and hesitation. She looked at Milo again. If you go, promise me something. He nodded slowly. Don't disappear the way he did. Milo didn't answer immediately, but in the look he gave her, muted, earnest, raw, there was a promise, fragile and unspoken. He gathered the scattered drawings, slipping them back into his folder one by one. Rain still poured outside, and the room remained dim, but something had shifted. The silence, once heavy and impenetrable, now felt like a pause before something inevitable. The door hadn't closed yet. The bus slipped down the glass and felt like shedding a second skin. Blurring the city lights Milo sat near the apartment window, hood pulled over his head, headphones in from the refrigerator was the only sound. The muted hum of the engine save for the scratch of Milo's streetlights across a worn strange sense of detachment. He sat cross-legged watching his living room from the outside, surrounded by scattered pages filled with designs, just Leo, costumes, Elena, figures in motion, short, apologetic ideas to the gallery that he never received a reply to. His focus was intense. He didn't blame them, almost desperate. Outside the fogged-up window, him forget the skyline uncertainty that clung to his every decision. Giving way to low suburbs across the room, wide. Elena stood in the kitchen of road. Her arms Milo reached tightly over her chest and pulled out a small. She wasn't looking at Milo's sketchbook, though her gaze drifted pages were blank more than once. He had intentionally left his old shoulders had become a constant presence over the last few weeks. Every unfinished she had learned to measure Milo's silence. If this trip was supposed to mean anything, it had to begin with space. You missed your meeting again. He was headed to a small coastal town quietly, 3 hours north. Her voice carefully neutral. A place he'd only read about online, and the pencil hovering in the background of one of his father's photographs. It wasn't important. He remembered the photo. It was your third meeting with the gallery, she replied. Storm-braced skies. That doesn't sound unimportant. A boy in a yellow raincoat standing at the edge of deflating. Milo never knew something I'm not ready to give. Maybe no one. Elena stepped away from the counter. The bus jerked to a stop at a small, lonely station. Maybe no one else got off. You actually care about showing your work. Evening. Pulling his jacket tighter, he said sharply, then smelled of salt and just pine. Not the way they want me to. The sky a dim gradient between silence settled between something darker. Deep he walked familiar. The short distance to the rental house was a labyrinth of ideas, but when it came to talking about them, trees, letting someone in, he always light flickering weakly like Elena had spent years learning how to pick that lock. The house was clean, but it felt like every key she had ever forged was useless. Everything she functional, took a seat on the couch, lacking warmth, letting her eyes wander across the artwork, turned on a single lamp, and stood in the center of the room. Most people would kill for that opportunity, unsure what to do with himself now that he was finally away. Milo finally looked up, morning, and for a moment, the wind had picked up. His expression flickered. Seagulls called somewhere in the distance, quite read, and the sea, visible just beyond the tree line. Being seen isn't the same as being under the pale sun. Before Milo she found an old thermos in the kitchen, front door rattled filled open. It with bitter coffee. A gust of wind headed toward the beach, and with it came Leo under his arm. Milo's younger brother. The sand was coarse his jacket and gray. Was soaked. The shoreline littered to his forehead and shattered eyes shells. Lit with adrenaline. He sat on a weathered bench. He tossed his bag and began to draw without ceremony, not with any intent. I swear the buses are getting worse every day. Letting his hand remember how it felt. Then noticed the tension hanging in the room. That's when he saw him. What did I miss? A few yards away. Elena, a boy about his age, stood at the water's hands on her jeans, his back to Milo. Nothing. Arms tucked into a worn denim jacket. He had a camera between them over one shoulder, eyebrows raised, and a quiet stillness Milo, about him. Okay? Like Milo gave a half smile. To waiting on the world I'm to always reveal itself. The boy turned sort of answer Leo had grown used to. Their even eyes as he stopped believing brief, it. But he kicked off his shoes and then he looked away, the kitchen, lifted the camera, paused when his eyes and took a picture of the horizon before unopened letters on the toward the rocky cliff. You got something from Dad. Milo watched him disappear into the trees. Unsure why the encounter had unsettled him, and picked up the envelope. Maybe it was the boy's handwriting was unmistakable and unreadable, mechanical, or maybe it was something else without emotion. A strange sense of familiarity. He turned it over once, as if that photo from years ago had just walked past him. You could at least read what he has to say. The next day, Milo returned to the same bench, Sketchbook
He said enough
open.
when he left.
Pages
Milo
already
replied.
stained with salt.
Elena
from the air.
didn't speak.
The boy was
but
there
her
again.
eyes followed Milo
Farther down
as
the
he
beach
returned
this
to
time.
his sketches.
Crouched low
She'd
near a
never
tide
met their
pool.
father.
Camera
Only
to his
heard the
eye.
pieces.
Milo
An
debated
artist saying
himself.
something.
Brilliant,
He wasn't
but
sure
absent.
why he wanted to.
Emotionally
By
remote
the third
until
day,
finally
it felt deliberate.
he disappeared
The
altogether.
boy appeared not
Milo
just near
never
the shore,
talked about him,
but
in
on the
anything
trail
but
Milo used
fragments.
to get to town.
The
or
wind
near the market,
howled against the window,
or even once
and
outside
the city
small
lights
library.
flickered faintly
They hadn't
beyond
spoken
the
yet.
storm.
But
The
Milo
apartment
had
felt
started
smaller than
recognizing
usual.
his walk.
The three
The
of
way
them
his
sharing a
hands
space
moved when
that
he
wasn't
adjusted
built
the
to
lens.
hold their separate
How
silences.
he always stood a little
Leo
apart
leaned
from others,
against the wall,
but never
arms
seemed out of
crossed.
place.
You
On the
ever
fourth
wonder
day,
if he left
the boy
because
spoke
he was
first.
like you?
You're the guy
Milo
with the
looked up,
sketchbook.
startled.
Milo
Leo
Leo
hesitated.
startled.
The
He had
boy
all
stood
that
beside
talent,
the
right?
bench now.
Maybe it just got too
Sunlight
heavy.
tangled in his hair.
It didn't get heavy.
And you're the guy with the
Milo
camera,
said, quieter
Milo
now.
replied.
He just
Closing the
walked
book
away
slowly.
before he had to carry
I'm
it.
Ari.
For a while,
the boy said,
no one said
holding out his
anything.
hand.
The
Milo
storm outside
shook it.
intensified.
Rain
They sat
lashing
in
harder
silence for a
against the
moment.
windows. The waves
Elena
lapping
returned to
at
the
the shore
couch,
below.
and Leo
Ari
pulled
slumped
out his
into a
camera
chair near the
and
door.
glanced at Milo.
They had all
Do you
grown
draw
used
what you
to waiting
see,
for Milo to
or
open up.
what you feel?
Used to the way
Milo
he created
tilted his
distance,
head,
even in the same
surprised
room.
by the question.
But something in
I
his
used
face
to draw
tonight
what
was
I
different.
thought people wanted.
Tired
Lately,
yes.
I'm
but
trying
also
not to think
exposed.
about it at all.
Milo closed
Ari
his
nodded
sketchpad.
like he
I've
understood.
been thinking of leaving.
I take photos
Elena
of
sat
things
up
that
straight.
almost disappear.
What? Light
Just for a
through
while.
fog
To figure things out.
reflections in puddles.
Leaving where?
Stuff that looks like
Leo
nothing
asked.
unless you're
I don't
really
know
paying
yet,
attention.
Milo replied.
Milo
Somewhere
smiled
quiet.
faintly. Somewhere
That sounds like
doesn't
art to
expect
me.
anything from
They
me.
talked a little more.
Elena
Nothing
searched
deep.
his face.
What brought Milo
You
to the
really
coast?
think
How
you'll
long Ari
find
had
clarity
lived there?
running from
Ari
everything?
didn't ask personal
I
questions.
think I'll suffocate
and Milo
if I
was
stay.
grateful.
But there was
answer
something in
left
Ari's
little room
presence
for
that
argument.
made the silence between
Leo
them
opened his
feel
mouth,
intentional,
then closed
not
it
empty.
again. Like
Elena
standing
stared
beside
at the coffee
someone on a
table,
high ledge,
where a
not
half-finished
because drawing
of
you
lay
might
in
fall,
soft
but because
graphite.
you both
A
understand
hand
the
reaching
view.
out.
As the
Fingers
sun began
curled,
to dip, but not close,
casting the sky
a
in
gesture
soft
caught
hues
between
of amber
offering
and
and
violet.
hesitation.
Ari
She
stood.
looked at Milo
There's
again.
a trail up the
If
cliff.
you go, promise
Best
me
view in
something.
town.
He
You should
nodded
see it
slowly.
before the weather turns.
Don't disappear the way
He
he
walked
did.
off before
Milo
Milo
didn't
could
answer
respond.
immediately.
Camera swinging
But in the
at his
look he
side.
gave her that night,
Muted,
Milo
earnest,
sat on the
raw.
porch of the rental house.
There was a promise,
sketchbook, in his
fragile
lap.
and unspoken.
He hadn't drawn Ari.
He gathered the
not
scattered
directly,
drawings,
but the
slipping
pages
them back
held
into his
fragments
folder
now.
one by one.
The curve
Rain
of a shoulder,
still poured outside,
the tilt of a head,
and the room
the
remained
outline
dim,
of someone
but
always
something
half
had
in
shifted.
shadow. The
He
silence,
was beginning to feel
once
something
heavy
he
and
hadn't
impenetrable.
in months.
Curiosity
Now felt like a pause
and maybe
before something
for the
inevitable.
first time in a long
the
while,
door hadn't closed
a faint
yet.
flicker of hope that he wasn't entirely lost. The
Rain
bus
slipped
ride
down
up
the
the
glass
city
deeper
felt
than
like
Milo
shedding a
shifted.
second
Blurring
skin.
the city lights
Milo
stood
sat
on
near
the
the
back,
apartment
and
window.
sea wind
pulled over his
tugged at his
coat
as he
had
clung.
bones
Hum
in
from
the
the
refrigerator
refrigerator
was
clutching
the
the
only
scratch
sound.
of
Hum of the
sketchbook,
engine
save for the
and the
scratch of
passing
Milo's
blur of
sky above
streetlights
was a
gave off
flat
a
gray
strange
sketch
hinting
pen.
at rain.
He sat
He
cross-legged,
wondered if
watching his
Ari
room
had
floor,
chosen this
surrounded
moment
by
deliberately.
he hadn't told many like
Pages
while he
filled
was
with
how people
designs.
moved
Just
through
Leo,
costumes.
Elena,
Figures
and
no
Milo
short,
reached the summit.
apologetic ideas
found
that
Ari
Ari
already
had
never
home.
received a
Sitting
reply to.
cross-focused was
He
an
didn't
edge
blame
of
them.
flattened
Almost
rock.
outside the foggy
Drawing
camera
helped him
resting
forget
in
the
his
skyline
mind
thin
his
and deep
eyes
that
were on the
clung to
horizon.
tall buildings
Every
giving
decision
way to
ocean
low
met the
across the
sky
room.
in a
Why?
seamless
Elena
blur.
stood in the
Empty
kitchen.
stretches of
He didn't
road.
turn
Her
as
arms
Milo
folded
reached into his
tightly
backpack
over
over
her
her
chest.
and pulled out a
Ari
small
said, she wasn't looking as
cloth
Milo's
bound
quiet,
sketchbook,
but though her
not
gaze
surprised.
drifted to him, Milo sat beside him.
intentionally
The
liked
tension
his
in
shoulders
shoulders had
over the
become
edge.
a constant
Every
presence
household
over the
idea,
last
the
few
waves
weeks.
every
Although she had
unfinished
learned to
figure,
measure
harmless.
Milo's
If this
silence.
trip
The
was
illusion
supposed to
seemed
mean
absence.
anything,
It
but
had to
you come
begin
up
your
with
loss.
space.
You
Milo
missed your
headed
meeting
to a
again.
small
When I
coastal
need to
town
think,
3 hours
her
north,
voice
Ari
carefully
said. A place
neutral,
he'd
or
only
stop
read about
Milo
online.
paused. A gust
And
of
the wind
wind
blew
hovering
through
in background,
rustling the
he didn't
sparks
look
photographs
photographs.
that
It
clung
wasn't
to
important.
the
He remembered the
side.
photo.
It was your
for
30
30
meeting
minutes
with the gallery.
Neither of them
clarified.
spoke.
Storm braced
That doesn't
skies.
sound
Milo
unimportant.
looked at
Boy
Ari
didn't
in a
feel
yellow
silence
exit
standing at
as
the
if
edge of the
deflating.
Most people were afraid
Milo
of
wanted
never knew who
something
the boy
I'm not
was.
ready to
Quiet
give.
exposed
Maybe no one.
something
Elena Elena stepped away from the counter.
Why did you come here?
You mean they
Ari
asked
asked
suddenly,
lonely
turning to look at him.
Maybe
No one else
even
Milo
Milo
hesitated.
actually
Milo
care
stepped
about
he didn't have an
showing
easy
her
answer.
Pulling
His
one
jacket
air
wanted to share out
he said
loud.
sharply,
Then
smelled
remember
salt
who I
and
am.
just
Not the way they want
sky
me
a
to.
dim gradient
Without
between
silence
dark
telling me
something
who
darker.
I should be.
Deep
He
and
walked
Ari
the short
nodded
distance
slowly.
to the
Milo's
rental
mind
house,
was
a
hard.
labyrinth of
A
ideas.
narrow
Milo
story
talking
about
them,
them trees.
letting someone in.
Almost
The orange
a
light
closed
flickering
door.
weakly like
Elena
it was
had
surprised
spent
to be
years
on.
learning
Ari
how to
picked
pick
up
up
the camera and
the house was
adjusted the
clean,
settings.
but
It felt
impersonal.
like pointed
Every
it toward
care
Milo.
she had ever
He didn't
forged
take a
was
photo
useless.
yet.
Just
Everything
watched
she took through the
functional.
lens for a moment before letting her eyes
Milo
wander
looked like
across
someone
the
who's
artwork
about to
turned
run
on a single
across
lamp
the floor
and
who's
stood
afraid
center
most
of the
people
room
would
for
kill
a
for that
long
opportunity.
time. Milo
Unsure
unsure
what
what
to
to
do
do
with
with
himself
to be
now that
sadly
he was
accurate.
finally
Milo,
awake.
I've finally
seen it
looked
by
up
morning,
for, and for a
Ari
moment
said.
had picked
His
up. I
expression
wore it
flickered
like seagulls
something
called
Elena
somewhere in the
couldn't quite
distance. Sat a
read,
while
and the
longer,
sea,
and then Ari
visible
maybe
just
just beyond the
fear.
tree line.
The shutter
Being
clicked
seen
softly,
isn't the same
like
as
endlessly
closing
under
under
the
the
pale
he said.
sun.
As they walked
With
back
Milo
down the
found
trail,
an old thermos in
the
the
front
kitchen,
door
picking up
rattled
filled it
open.
with
Milo
bitter
found
coffee.
himself
A gust of wind
glancing
headed
sideways
toward
at
the
Ari
beach,
more often
and with
than
it
the
came
sketchbook
Leo
under his arm.
There was
Milo's
something
younger
careful
brother
about
about
him.
him.
His
His
neck
gray,
closed off,
but
his
shoreline
shoreline
littered
littered
with
with
he didn't offer
forehead
pieces
and
of
eyes
himself
lit with
unless
adrenaline.
he sat on a weathered
He
bench
polished his bag
beside
again
without
well.
ceremony.
At the bottom
Not
of
with
the
I
hill.
swear the
The
buses
sky
are getting
getting
worse
moving.
every day.
Letting
Rain
his hand
fell and
remember
sudden,
how it
then
felt
noticing
deeply
the
without
tension
pressure.
hanging in the
Cold
room.
and
That's when he saw
merciless.
him.
Ari
A
laughed
few
as
yards
they
away,
both started
Elena
by
boy
rose,
about his age
darting
stood in
brushing
the
her
water
hands
paths
on her
and
jeans
low
back
trees
to Milo.
until they
Nothing.
reached a
Arms
weathered
just a
gazebo
conversation
to a
we've
warm
had
denim
before.
jacket. They ducked inside.
He had
Leo
cameras
glanced between
sewn
them
over
and
one
brushed
shoulder,
eyebrows
and
raised.
a
I think
quiet
the universe
stillness
just
okay?
tested
Like
our
Milo
dedication.
gave a
Someone
half
used to
smile.
waiting
Ari
on the
said,
world
I'm
to
always
reveal
looking
himself.
water from his hair.
The boys
It was
turned
the
Milo
slightly
laughed
Leo
his
had
first
first
real
said
laugh
to.
in weeks.
Their
Even
eyes
as he stopped
believing it.
brief.
They
They
stood
stood
there
there
in
in
the
the
half
shoes.
shelter,
Then he looked
toward the
away,
kitchen,
sharp
lifted
with
the
the
cameras
saws,
when his
and
eyes
took a
caught
picture
and
of the
for a
horizon
moment,
before
unopened
walking
the
letters
only
on the
thing
corridor.
Milo felt
You
was
got
present.
something from Dad.
Milo
Not
watched
haunted
him
by
disappear
the
into the trees,
not paralyzed
unsure
by
why
what
the
waited
encounter
beyond
over
him,
settled
and
him.
picked up the envelope.
Just
Maybe
here,
it was the
the
boy's
handwriting
handwriting
was
against a
unmistakable
wooden beam,
and
clean.
unreadable,
You ever think about not
or
going
maybe
back
it was
as if
something
written
else.
Milo
without
turned
emotion.
toward him.
He
He
turned
turned
it over
over
once, as if
Then
that
Ari's
photo
photo
from
from
years
years
ago
ago
without
readable.
opening.
Walked past
And
him.
you could at least
I don't know
read
if
what he
not
has to
going
say.
back means free.
Milo
Leo
returned
said,
to the same
voice
bench.
low. Maybe he
Sketchbook
said enough
open,
when he
Ari
left.
said.
Pages,
Milo
maybe it has to
replied
be.
with salt.
Elena
Milo
didn't thought
speak.
about
The
Elena
boy was
was
there
there
again
and
and
Leo.
followed Milo
Farther
about
down
the
the
return
unopened
sketches.
letters.
Crouched
The gallery
low
near
near
never
the
met their
ignored.
father.
Camera
Only
teasing
thought about
pieces.
his drawings.
Milo
How long
demanded
he had
saying
saying
something.
pieces.
Brilliant,
He wasn't
but
sure
sure
why
why
he vanished
emotionally
away
remote
his father
third day,
finally,
but
it
he
felt
didn't want to be
deliberate.
swallowed by
The boy
other
appeared
people's
not
visions.
just
Milo
near
never
the
talked
shore.
about
Ari
him,
reached
but
into
anything
anything
Milo
Milo
used
used
to
to
get
and
to
pulled out
town,
a
the
folded
wind
held
market,
against the
or
window.
he
Even
offered
when
it
to
to
Milo
city lights
without
flickered
explanation.
faintly
They hadn't
beyond
spoken
storm.
this, but
The apartment
Milo
felt
started
smaller than
recognizing
usual.
his walk.
The three
Ari
of
was
them
sharing his space.
He
He
used
used
to write to
me
me
after
after
their
he left,
separate
how he
silence.
always
Said it
stood
helped
a
him.
little
Leo
apart from
leaned
others,
against the wall.
but
Milo
never
looked
seemed
out of
crossed.
place.
It
You'll
had
never
never been
wonder
opened.
if he left
The boy
because
spoke
haven't
first.
read
Like
it.
you? You're the
I
guy
wasn't ready
looked
to.
up,
Thought
startled.
maybe it was
Milo
Milo
for
Leo
like
has
you.
it startled.
Milo
He had all
opened
the
it
beside the
right?
bench now.
Maybe
But
it just
something
got
in Ari's
heavy
tangled in his hair.
and
It didn't get
paused.
heavy.
And you're the guy
There
with
was
the
no
camera
weight
said,
in the offer.
quiet
Milo
now.
replied.
No pressure.
He just
Closing
walked
the
away
gesture
before he
like
had
handing
him
over
over
a
match
for a
and
while.
the boy said
No one
too
holding
darn
out his
thing.
hand.
He tucked the
smile
envelope
outside
into his sketch Milo.
intensified. That
Rain
evening
sat
lashing
inside
after the
against
storm
the
passed,
windows.
and the
The
waves
Elena
lapping
returned
the
to the
shore
below.
was smoky
And
lava.
Ari pulled out his
Milo
camera
sat
in
in
the
the
rental
rental
house.
house. They had
and
all
stared
drawn
on
what
used
you
to waiting
see,
for Milo to
or
open
he
up
didn't
what you
draw
feel.
yet.
Used to the way
Instead,
Milo
he
tilted his
opened
head
the
even in
envelope.
the same
Surprised
room.
by
The
the
letter
question. But
inside
something in
was
his
used to
mom
draw what I
tonight
thought
was
people
spoke of
wanted.
escape,
Tired,
late
of
yes,
guilt,
I'm
but
trying
also
not to
both
think
that
about it at
followed.
all.
Milo
Even when
closed
Ari
his
nodded
sketch
like he
I've
understood.
been thinking of
Missing
leaving home in ways
photos
that
that
never
never
almost disappeared.
What?
Of the art that
Light
just for a while.
pouring out,
Even
to
when
figure
the
things
world
out
wasn't
wasn't
watching.
leaving
where?
By the time he
Leo
finished
thinks, unless you're
I don't know
really
yet.
paying attention.
Milo replied.
He picked up his
Milo
pencil,
somewhere
smiled
quiet,
figure
faintly.
walking
Somewhere
into
that
sounds like
doesn't
art
expect
to me.
camera
Anything from
swinging
me.
from
Talked a
one
little
hand.
more.
Elena
Nothing
searched
searched
his
his
face
face.
what
What
brought
brought
Milo
Milo
to the
really
coast?
think
How
you'll
lines
find
came
clarity
easily
running
without
from Ari
resistance?
didn't ask personal
Then
questions.
another
I think I'll
sketch,
suffocate
and Milo
if I
was
stray.
two figures on a cliff.
But there was
Answer
something in
inside
Ari's
little
presence
for
that
our
made the
tethered not
silence
by
between
words,
them
opened his
feel
mouth.
understanding,
then closed
not
it
for
again.
the first time in months.
Elena
stared at
beside
someone
someone
with
like
high
breathing,
where a
not
finished
finished
drawer
drawer
what the next day would bring
because
or
you
the
both
one after
understand
that.
reaching
But
out
he knew
as the
he
sun
needed
began
again, but not
knew
close.
the clear sky
a gesture caught
and
between
the
offering
and
and
violet
hesitation.
fall no
Ari,
matter
she looked at
what he
Milo.
chose.
There's a
Again.
trail up
Milo
there. Hugo
leaned back
in
in
the
the
best
chair
view in town
and closed his eyes.
You should see it.
Slowly
He
before
wasn't
the
ready
weather
to
turned.
don't disappear the way
But
he
he
did.
walked
Maybe
off
he was
before
ready.
Milo
Milo
didn't
didn't answer
respond.
immediately.
Camera swinging
but in the
at his
look he
side.
gave her that night,
Muted,
Milo
earnest,
sat on the
raw.
porch of the rental house.
There was a promise,
sketchbook,
in his
fragile
lap.
and unspoken.
He hadn't
drawn Ari.
He gathered the
not
scattered
direct
drawings,
but the
slipping
pages
them back
held
into
fragments
his folder
now.
one by one.
The curve
Rain
of a shoulder,
still poured outside,
the tilt of a head,
and the room
the
remained
outline
dim,
of someone
but
always
something
had
had
been
shifted.
shadow.
The
He
silence,
was beginning to feel
once
something
heavy
he
and
hadn't
impenetrable.
months.
Now
Curiosity
felt like a pause
and maybe
before something
for the
inevitable.
first time in a long
the
while,
door hadn't closed
a faint
yet. Flicker of hope that he wasn't entirely lost.
Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the walls in soft hues of gold and gray. Milo sat on the edge of his bed, the sketchbook balanced on one knee, a mug of half-cold coffee in his hand. The drawing from last night stared back at him. Ari on the cliff's edge, the wind shaping his silhouette like a sculpture in motion. There was something in the pose that felt unresolved. Milo turned the page. He hadn't seen Ari since the rain. 3 days had passed, and the absence gnawed at him in a way he didn't want to admit. He told himself Ari was probably busy, that he'd show up when he wanted to, the way he always did. But the town felt quieter without him. The cliff, less inviting. Milo had gone back to the gazebo twice, waiting under the same crooked beams, but Ari never appeared. That afternoon, driven more by instinct than intention, Milo walked the path through town to the photography shop Ari had mentioned once, offhandedly. The windows were dusty, and the sign above the door hung slightly askew. Inside, the smell of old paper and developing fluid lingered like memory. A woman behind the counter looked up when Milo entered. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone." "Ari." The woman raised an eyebrow. "You're a friend?" Milo hesitated. "I think so." She studied him for a moment before nodding toward the back room. "He has a studio upstairs. Go ahead." The narrow staircase creaked under Milo's feet. At the top, a small door stood ajar, warm light spilling out. He knocked lightly and pushed it open. Ari was seated at a table covered in prints, hands stained with ink and chemical residue, headphones slung around his neck. He looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Hey," Ari said, wiping his fingers on a rag. "Didn't expect you." "I noticed," Milo replied, stepping inside. "Thought you vanished." Ari motioned toward the mess. "Deadlines. There's a gallery in the city that asked for a series. Thought I'd give them one." Milo glanced at the photographs spread across the table, moody landscapes, intimate glimpses of people in motion, one of the beach caught just before the rain fell. And in the center, a black and white image of Milo himself, sitting on the cliff's edge, unaware he was being watched. He stared at it, unsettled. "You took this?" Ari nodded. "You said you wanted to remember who you were. I figured that included the parts you don't see." Milo's throat tightened. "You should have asked." Ari stood, voice calm but firm. "Would you have said yes?" Milo didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ari stepped closer. "I don't take photos of people I don't care about. I don't show them to galleries unless it matters. But this, you meant something. Still does." There was no accusation in his tone, just truth. Milo felt his defenses unraveling, thread by thread. "I left because I was scared of being seen," Milo said. "And then you showed me I already was." Ari met his gaze. "So, what are you going to do with that?" It wasn't a challenge. It was a door. Milo looked back at the photo. He didn't love it, not yet. But he didn't hate it either. It was honest in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. He reached for his sketchbook, flipped to a blank page, and handed it to Ari. "Your turn." Ari raised an eyebrow. "You want me to draw?" "No," Milo said. "You choose. Something that's yours." Ari hesitated, then took the book and a nearby marker. With deliberate strokes, he sketched a line, a path, a figure walking towards something undefined. When he finished, he passed it back. "It's not much," Ari said. "It's enough," Milo replied. They stood there for a while, the silence charged with something neither of them tried to define. Not quite certainty, but not confusion either. Just recognition. That night, Milo returned to the house and opened his father's letter, the one he had tucked away weeks ago without reading. This time, he read slowly. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a roadmap. It was raw and incomplete, full of half-formed thoughts and scattered memories. His father spoke about fear, about the weight of creativity, about how loving something, someone, could sometimes make you run instead of stay. Milo finished the letter and placed it beside the envelope Ari had given him. 2 different absences. 2 different choices. The next morning he packed his bag. Not everything. Just enough. Sketchbooks, pencils, Ari's drawing. He left a note on the kitchen table, a line for Elena, another for Leo, promising he'd return, but not just yet. He met Ari at the cliff, where it had all begun. "I don't know what comes next," Milo said. Ari offered a faint smile. "That's how you know it's real." They stood side by side, the sea below, the sky wide open above them. And then they walked, not toward an ending, but into something unfolding. Something true.